I find it quite hard to believe that this foundation is the age it is and has had the achievements it's had, because I feel as if I've known it for a very long time. And it's a real honour for me to be invited to give this keynote speech here today in this place. When you look at the history of philanthropy, you look first at our great historic abbeys. When you look at the history of welfare and concern for the poorest, you look at that monastic tradition. And there is something about a discussion about philanthropy in a place that is really suitable for this particular venue today. So thank you for inviting me to talk today, but thank you particularly for allowing it to happen in such an amazingly historically significant building for all of us who have a concern with that first head of charity, which is poverty. The first requirement the Elizabethan Poor Laws gave to charitable organisations and therefore to philanthropy was to relieve poverty. And I want to share with you the journey the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has been on, not because I think it's unique, although I think it is, and not because I think it's so fantastically important, though clearly I do, but because I think it gives lessons to all of us involved in philanthropy about what we can do when we marshal our considerable breadth and depth of resource. Now, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation was set up in 1904, so a little bit older than you, but a great deal younger than some of the history of philanthropy in this country. And it was set up by a Quaker businessman in York, a businessman who left 3 very significant legacies. And the legacies are ones we carry today. He left a legacy of community, of place, of building housing. To this day, the reason I have a rather funny job title is because we run a foundation and a housing trust. We house people in the northeast in Hartlepool, in Scarborough and across Yorkshire. We house and we provide care. That's a bold and a practical legacy, a legacy that keeps your feet firmly on the ground. When you pursue the second legacy, which was to find things out, find out the reasons why there are social evils, is in our founding memorandum. So a legacy of practice, of doing stuff, a legacy of finding things out, of gathering information. And a third critically important legacy, which every time a government minister mutters about charities what should stick to their knitting, I recall that Joseph Rowntree told us to go forth and change the face of England. That's some ambition to be set up with. So it's a legacy which is bold, which is practical, which is serious intellectually, but which is absolutely and permanently focused on change. So when 4 years ago we decided that it was time, remember that time, 2012? Brave time to do it. It was time to focus all our resources on the issue that we have been addressing for over 100 years. We had libraries full of reports about what you could do about poverty. We had lived through government strategies in all the 4 countries of the UK about how you could address fuel poverty 1 year, child poverty another year, troubled families another year. We'd lived through that and we had this evidence base. And we, through our trustee body, made a commitment to marshal all of that experience, all of that research, using our name and our power to convene, using our networks and our ability to communicate, to try to understand this bold and audacious thing. What could we do to solve poverty in the UK? And I've brought a few copies of this, but of course, in a modern age, they're all available on our website. Because what we did in that report was recognise something which I think will be known to all of you in this region. We recognise that poverty in the UK is real. That's a big thing to recognise. 13.5 million people can't make ends meet. They can't get by. 13.5 million people are living in real financial difficulty. That's a big number for this country to deal with. It's quite a shocking number, but it's a big number, and it's one that we think we know, that all of our research capability has demonstrated to be true. But poverty is not just real in the UK, it causes real harm. And our research had for decades tracked and continues to track the very precise harm that is done, echoed by our new Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street, that if you are born poor, you will die 10 years younger. If you are born poor, you will do less well than other children when you join school or kindergarten at the age of 3. Teachers will be able to tell the difference. Real harm to real individuals and real families. But not just, or should I say not only harm to those individuals and their families, huge harm to all of us. The existence of poverty in this scale in the UK at this time is hugely damaging to the whole nation. It jeopardizes our return to growth. Lord knows we need a return to growth. It costs us £78 billion a year as a nation. It wastes the skills. Every child who starts at the age of 3 behind is a wasted set of skills at a time we need the best skills in this country. And it threatens our political settlement, as I think many of us witnessed on the morning of the 24th of June, when vast swathes of this country, including many in the northeast, voted against the main political parties, voted against the wisdom that was being given to them by leaders of industry, and said, actually, this is not good enough. The settlement we are living with is not one we are contented with. Now, whether you think that's the beginning of a new form of fantastic sovereignty for the UK or a disaster, or like many of us, you're not quite sure where it's going to go, that vote said there is a level of dissatisfaction at the way things are going in this country. So I think we were right to say poverty causes harm to the people who experience it, but causes harm to the society as a whole, because we fear poverty. We're all very conscious of how close to poverty many of us are. And we know that in continuing with these levels of poverty, we are risking both our recovery and our social solidarity. So we argue that it was real, that it caused harm. But most importantly, and this is where I really want to talk to you, we argued that it can be solved. Poverty is not something in this country inevitable. It's not something like the weather. Nights are drawing in, what can we do about it? It is a set of conscious choices. And in this document, and in the very weighty document that sits behind it on our website, we have analysed the different players in this world. And when I speak to an audience of this sort, I'm extremely conscious that for many of us, for many decades, we have talked about poverty and looked to government. And we have said, and I've been in all those meetings, if only government would do. In this report, we're saying that all the evidence points to it not just being a responsibility for government. Now, I have to be careful in a tweeting audience, because last time I said this, somebody tweeted, Julia Unwin says government not responsible for poverty. I've not said that, so don't tweet that. What I've said is poverty does not just belong to government. And even if we think it is, we can't afford to wait, because the damage being done to the fabric of our society is too great. We have argued that there is an achievable milestone. It is possible to design a society where the children who start school this autumn, the Brexit generation, when they leave school, so in 15, 16 years, there will be nobody destitute in the UK. There are currently 1.25 million people destitute, a figure that I don't think I would never have imagined we would witness again. That no more than 10% of the population would ever be in poverty. And most challengingly, but most importantly of all, that nobody would be in poverty for more than 2 years. We recognise, and you will all recognise, that poverty can happen to any of us. Get divorced, get ill, lose your job, work in Redcar, the steel works go. There are all sorts of reasons why people and communities and places fall into poverty. But a civilised society knows how to organise around that. It knows how to say to somebody who's had a nervous breakdown and therefore not able to work, we have the steps and the movements to make sure that you can slowly get back into work. We can plan for changes in the steelworks in Redcar. We can make the adjustments that you need to enable you to take part. And our contention is that that responsibility sits with government, yes, of course, but with cities and regional government too, with local government and with communities, with businesses who absolutely know in their bones that doing business in a place where such a high percentage of young people are not able to work, which is Northumberland, is no place to do business. That in a place like Northumberland, where 11% of people are living in fuel poverty, it is not a healthy, prosperous place in which to operate. So in this prospectus, we have put forward strategies for what business can do, what communities can do, and what voluntary organisations can do. And we say that in full consciousness of the volatility that was just being described by your treasurer, the volatility in the markets and the volatility in our global environment. We argue that there are three places where we can intervene on poverty. We can intervene at the level of prospects. 4 out of 5 people who start in low-paid work today will still be low-paid 10 years later. That's really different from when I was growing up. When I started work, everybody was low-paid, and that was your starter wage. If you're low-paid when you're in your 40s and 50s, you have a domestic crisis on a grand scale. When your washing machine breaks down, you will be tipped into problematic debt. So the prospects people have in the jobs, the ways in which we structure our approach to productivity in those low-paying sectors really matters. The prospects for young people leaving school this summer matter. The sorts of community initiatives we were hearing about today, which make sure that no child is left behind, are absolutely central to a fight against poverty. And you may not call it a fight against poverty. You may call it, like those wonderful musicians, a recycling project that is bringing people back into a world of work. But you are fundamentally addressing the prospects that people need, a sense of hope and a sense of opportunity. The research that Joseph Rowntree Foundation commissioned about why people voted the way they did on the 23rd of June demonstrated absolutely clearly that prospects and opportunity were at the heart of it, and that were places where people could see positive change, could see something happening, regardless of their own personal circumstances. They voted one way. And in places where people despaired and saw no prospects, they voted another way. So prospects is something that philanthropy can really attend to. And I'll talk in a minute about how it can attend to it. But voluntary and community organisations can focus on the prospects for people, not just young people, because we will always focus on young people, and we need to focus on young people, but all those older people whose jobs have now disappeared and who need a different way into the labour market. We need to focus on people's pockets, because the money going into people's pockets is half the equation for why people are poor. Not enough money is going in a low-paid sector with the benefits of problems we're facing. But far, far too much money is going out of people's pockets. The costs paid by poorer households are much, much higher than those paid by anybody who can pay their bills by direct debit, who can borrow extraordinarily cheaply, and who can pay very little for their housing. An American visitor said to me recently, if housing was free in the UK, you'd have no poverty. And it takes an outsider to see that actually our huge costs that we're piling on to people are part of what's trapping people in poverty. So we talk about prospects and we talk about pockets. And in terms of reducing costs for poorer households, there is so much that we can do in every region of this country, in towns like Hexham, across Northumberland, indeed across the northeast. I haunt somewhere called Bright House. Has anyone else been into a Bright House? Beautiful shops, you can go in, you can buy your furniture, it looks fantastic. It will cost you an enormous amount of money for a very long time. In the charitable sector, we need to start disrupting that business. We need to start giving people access to washing machines that they don't pay for the rest of their natural lives and long beyond the life of the washing machine, for furniture, for borrowing, for finance, for access to housing, for food, which we know all the food retailers are telling us the costs of food are going to go up 20–25%. That worries most of us in this room. If you're on the margins I'm talking about, it's going to be extremely serious. So attending to the pockets of people in poverty is my second P. And the third is one which will be dear to the hearts of the foundation, but I suspect, having read the job titles of most of you in this room, the function and notion of place. We know that place matters to people in poverty. It's all very well people talking about the rich leading a jet-set life where they can settle anywhere, move to any city. The poorer you are, the more your locality matters. Your neighbourhood matters, your town matters, your region matters. That's where you'll get your support. And we know that the first steps out of poverty come not because a public servant or indeed a philanthropist or even a voluntary organisation gets involved. It's because your neighbours pay attention. It's because that first job that was word of mouth comes through your community. Because when things go wrong, you get that support. And that's why I applaud and celebrate regional and local philanthropy. Because in doing that, you do what Joseph Rowntree asked my organisation to do, which is strengthen the hands of those that do and make it possible for communities to do what they've always done, to do what they've probably done since Hexham Abbey was formed, which is provide support to your friends and to your neighbours, to their children and to others who are growing up in their area. A welcome to the stranger that makes a community a possible place. Philanthropic organisations can do so much more. I said I'd wave this around and I wanted to. In focusing on the vital signs, what this community foundation is doing is surfacing the facts that matter. It's keeping a really steely eye on what's going on. And just as my organisation annually publishes data across the UK, saying this is what's happening to poorer and excluded people, what you have in this document and all the documentation behind it is clear, compelling, and uncontroversial, unassailable data, which means you can keep an eye on it. And the first and most important thing philanthropic organisations can do is use that vast knowledge that we all hold through our grantees, through our research base, through our contacts, to say this is what's happening. The second thing we can do is to focus our grant giving in ways that really strengthen the organisations that can address and tackle poverty, and in particular make sure that those people who are themselves really struggling have a voice in this game. I can think of no other social change movement that has ever happened without people who are themselves affected having a voice. And certainly for JRF, our funding of the Poverty Truth Commissions has changed everything we've done because we couldn't have produced it without the evidence of people in poverty. And the third is to recognise that as anchor institutions, organisations with really deep roots in the community, you have the potential to really change the face of this region because your roots, not just through your grantees, but through the contacts your grantees have, not just through the companies that are members, but through their supply chain, not just through your donors, but through all their contacts. A possibility to really mobilise for a better region, a more resilient region, and one which can really live up to the fantastic potential that Vital Signs describes. Thank you very much.